GE, are you there?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I just realized that we're recording and it's actually me in the spotlight today.
Yeah, we're gonna do like we did for the Christmas Jesus birth story for the resurrection story, since it is Easter week.
Yep.
So
Zombie Jesus week, people.
Zombie Jesus week. And basically, I'm going to tell you what I know about, like, I'm going to do the beginning, recap thing, like you normally do, which mine's not nearly as funny, but I'm going to do that. And then GE here is going to be going through the arrest, trial, resurrection, passion, resurrection kind of stuff. And teaching us through that, since, Jesus mythicism is kind of the stuff, or Jesus historicity is kind of his area of expertise.
I am somewhat of an expert myself.
Yeah. So we're gonna do that this time. So I figured I would start it off with the whole groan thing, although my groan sounded creepy and yours sounds funny.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just louder. That's all.
You are.
Okay, so, KC.
Yeah.
You want to tell me what you know about the Good Friday, how good it was, and then Jesus dying and resurrecting? Like, I feel like that's not spoiling too much of the story.
Well, like, we need to start before Good Friday, because if we're going to go with the arrest and the trial, like, temporally, the trial happened on on Holy Thursday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then, what?
No, go ahead.
Well, that's how it's, set up. So, they have the whole Last Supper, blah, blah, blah. In that garden, Judas kissed him, whatever, to identify him, and he was arrested. Well, I know that there's some interesting stuff that happens during the arrest, at least in some of the story. Like, one of the disciples, I think maybe Simon Peter, cuts off a guard's ear. Mm-hmm. Or something like that. And Jesus gets kind of pissed about it, I guess, and is like, don't, go against these people. Well, whatever. He was arrested. And you have the Judas kiss thing. Did I mention that too? And to identify Jesus, which is ridiculous because doesn't Jesus say, "Here I am"?
Well, no. I mean, Jesus kind of points out how he was out and about, and they could have picked him up at any time. And there was no point.
But they ask, who is Jesus of Nazareth? And he says, "Here I am." And didn't, in one of the stories I remember, didn't all the guards, fall down? There was some, weird...
Well, that's when the ear gets cut off. Okay. I mean, there's, different versions of the Gethsemane thing.
Okay, that's fine. We'll go through that. This is my
I know.
So, after that, he's arrested and he's taken to trial. I think the next day he's taken to trial. The Sanhedrin Council, I believe, is where he's taken, and which I think is a group of Jewish, leaders. And he gets convicted of... I don't. It's either a blasphemy, or he's claiming to be a king, which is upsetting to the Roman Empire, right? Because they have their king, and so it would be him claiming to be a king would not be something that he should be doing. So I'm not sure exactly what the conviction charge is, but he's claiming to be a king, which is a problem. So he's turned over to Pontius Pilate, and Pilate goes through I'm not really sure what he does specifically, but there's some instances in which he feels bad for convicting him. There's a guy that he lets go and keeps Jesus. I think that happens at this point. Then he goes through we go through what we now refer to as the Stations of the Cross. The Roman guards abuse him, mock him and they make him carry the cross. They beat him up. They put a crown of thorns on his head, and he has to carry the cross up to the hill where he is crucified. He's nailed to the cross in between two other criminals. I'm not sure. I think they were thieves. I'm not sure what their crime was, but there were two other criminals, but they were not nailed. They were tied, as far as I recall. And they continue to mock. There are some of Jesus' disciples and women there. I know at one point Mary is there when he's walking the cross. Somebody helps him at one point, I think, carry the cross. And so anyway, he's nailed up to the cross. Eventually, they put a spear through his side. I know that when he yells out to God, "Why have you forsaken me?" And then there's an eclipse or an earthquake or both or something, and he dies. He's taken down. I don't know, the same day, or probably the same day. He's taken down and laid into a tomb and covered with a shroud. And then at some point later, I guess it would have to be 2 days later, which would be Sunday, because that's what happens on Good Friday. The crucifixion happens on Good Friday. Then you have Holy Saturday, which is kind of like a chill day. And then on Easter Sunday, which would have been not technically 3 days later, but here we are. There were women who went to the tomb. I know there are some different stories about the tomb, but generally I think the idea is the rock or the the cover stone, whatever, is moved away and the women go in. I think there's also a story when there's a guy who goes in. I'm not sure, but whatever. He's not there. Jesus is not there. I know there's a lot of shit that happens after they don't find him. I think in one of the stories, there's an angel that is sitting on the cover stone. So I'm not sure which one that's in. But anyways, Jesus isn't fucking there, and somehow, instead of his body just being taken or whatever, the story becomes he has been resurrected because he apparently appears to people after this time. Mm-hmm. I don't have anything else after that. Did I go all the way to where we need to talk about?
Yeah, okay. You did. Because we're just going to be discussing up to Jesus actually resurrecting, I guess, or the finding of the empty tomb, if you will.
Yeah.
Because each story is going to differ after that. But that's an interesting amalgam of all four Gospels.
I think I did that with Christmas, too. When we did the birth story, I had segments from the different...
Yeah, but I mean, it's not your fault because regularly they piece together different portions of it and they pick and choose which portions they want to say is the official story.
Well, I think it's interesting too because when you learn that, nobody tells you as you're learning it that these pieces are from different books. They just mash them all together and are like, here's the story.
Yeah, that's so true.
They don't really say, well, this book actually says this, and this book actually says this, which those two things are different. They just pick the one they want, and that's the part that gets into the general story that most people know.
Yeah. All right, so if you guys want to hear the real multiple different versions of Good Friday and Easter, then you'll need to stay tuned.
Sorry it was so long. I talk a lot.
What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? So, before we get into the actual Gospels here, which we're going to do it in kind of not reading directly through all of it because there's a lot of chapters that go with it. Yeah, there's a lot. So what I'm going to do is first we have to read the end of Isaiah 52 and Isaiah 53. Those are very big chapters for Good Friday and the resurrection of Jesus in general. Now, that's not the only book that is important. Also, Daniel and the Lion's Den. Mm-hmm. That's very important when at the empty tomb. We're not going to read the Daniels and the Lion's Den thing. Maybe we'll do that next year or something. Okay. But that's also important too. I'll be sure to point that out when we get there.
Okay. I'm strapped in.
You're strapped in? You got your butt holder holding?
My butt holder is holding.
Okay, good.
All right, I'm just going to sit back because I don't have to teach today.
All right, so heathens, we're going to be starting in Isaiah 52, verse 13. This section's titled "The Suffering and Glory of the Servant." Now, it has been noted by current apologists that, I should say current apologists who are not Christian will note how this is not talking about the actual Messiah of Jesus, time, like in the context of the thing, it supposedly he's talking about somebody else or something like that. But
Who else would they be talking about?
I'm not exactly sure.
Oh, okay.
But the important thing here is to know that the first century Jewish Christians specifically cite things in Isaiah 52 and 53, specifically as scripture that prophesies Jesus. So it doesn't matter what the actual context of the people that wrote it was. Mm-hmm. It only matters what context were the first century Jewish Christians using it in it.
Okay.
That's important, okay? So that's just to head off anybody that's like, that's not about Jesus. But they took it to be about Jesus. That's what matters.
How do we know that?
Well, in Mark, Isaiah 52 and 53, especially, and we'll see this in the Good Friday and Resurrection, Crucifixion and Resurrection, but specifically citing scriptures, and those scriptures are direct copy, like parts of them are direct copies from Isaiah 52 and 53.
Oh, okay. Are perfect.
So, all right. So starting at verse 13. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations
With his blood.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's my job to be the peanut gallery today.
Yeah. And kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were told, they will not, they will see.
What they were not told.
For what they were not told, they will see. And what they have not heard, they will understand. So this is 53:1 starting right here. Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. What?
He like a root out of dry ground. Mary was a virgin.
Yep. So she was dry?
Yeah. She hadn't gotten slippery yet.
He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth.
The way you read it is like, I don't know how, movie narrators.
Yeah.
It's funny.
Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. So I don't know if you guys really caught on, but there is a lot of imagery in there.
A lot.
Indicative of the Jesus story. And this was written way, way, way before Jesus supposedly got pinned to some wood.
Nailed.
Nailed.
You couldn't have put him up there with pins. That's ridiculous.
All right, so we're not going to actually start with the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin will espouse their issue with Jesus, but it is important to note that before the Sanhedrin, Jesus was fairly silent, with the exception of answering one question about being the Messiah, to which he answers in the affirmative.
Okay.
But other than that, he's silent in front of the Sanhedrin, and he's technically not like guilty of anything as far as the Romans go. Okay.
So that was after he was turned over to Pontius Pilate.
Well, we're gonna hear that.
Okay.
So this is Mark 15:1 that we're starting in. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna read this, and then in the subsequent gospels, we're just gonna talk about the differences. Okay? Because all the other gospels are pretty much based on Mark. So
and a lot of the stuff is repeated.
It is. And that's why we don't need to repeat everything a lot. So Jesus before Pilate. Are you guys ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. So the Sanhedrin questioned and held their kangaroo court the night before Good Friday.
So that was Thursday when they took him out of when he was arrested.
Right. He was arrested by the Sanhedrin. They passed judgment on him that night, but they couldn't actually take him to Pilate until the next morning because of Passover.
Oh, okay.
In Mark.
Gotcha.
So they bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You have said so," Jesus replied. Now, this exchange right here is directly copied in all Gospels.
Okay.
So, just so you know. The chief priest accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of?" But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now, it was the custom at the festival to release a prisoner from the people requested. Prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the crowd, with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. Important note here. This is not actual history. Pilate did not have any kind of actual festival release of a prisoner or anything like that. Although, like, governing Romans at the time would release prisoners on occasion, there is no like regular releasing of a prisoner. So this is completely made up by the Jewish Christians.
Okay.
And it's very specific, and I'll show you why here in a second. He goes on to continue. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of self-interest that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do, then, with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him!" they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate, but they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. So this is important right here because this is actually the Yom Kippur ritual in Judaism. If you guys don't know, in Yom Kippur, what you do is you get 2 lambs, I believe it is. You get 2 lambs. One of the lambs set free to carry the sins of Israel off into the woods. And then the other lamb is sacrificed to redeem the people for the sins.
Yes.
So
we've read about that in the Old Testament.
Yeah, we have. So, and this has to be done like every year, if I'm not mistaken. It's a yearly kind of ritual. This is exactly that. Because do you know what the name Barabbas stands for?
What?
Son of the Father.
Oh boy.
Guess what Jesus was?
What?
The Son of God. Supposedly.
So why did they release Barabbas?
Well, Barabbas, if you'll remember, it says on verse 15:7, it says, a man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising.
Yeah.
So he is convicted of the quote unquote sins of Israel.
Okay.
Insurrectionists, or, basically being insurrectionists, going against God is what the sin of Israel is.
Okay.
That's always the sin of Israel in the Old Testament.
Right.
So basically Barabbas is a representative of this sin. He's let go to carry the sin off, while Jesus is the sacrificial lamb that is bloodletted to redeem the sins. So, I mean, this is just the Yom Kippur, just with humans.
Right.
Right. And this is going to be basically the same story in each, but I'm going to point out the differences because it gets more elaborate as it goes on.
It always does.
It does. Well, I mean, that's how, stories changing over time, they always get more elaborate or more magical.
Like when you do telephone.
Yeah. So now the soldiers mocked Jesus. This is verse 16. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple, this is important, they put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!"
In that accent?
Yes.
Exactly.
They were hickish, okay? Yeah. Again and again, they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling to their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him.
All right.
So it goes from Pilate handing him over, which, by the way, Pilate is not this big of a pussy. Like, he's doing this to appease the Sanhedrin. Pilate doesn't give a fuck about the Sanhedrin. Like in Josephus, before the famous passage, we have Pilate actually having his men dress in Jewish, peasant robes or whatnot, right? Dressing up as Jews who were having a protest about some kind of water issue, right? And basically Pilate has them infiltrate the crowd and then snaps his fingers and they just kill everybody in the crowd, no matter who it is.
That is amazing.
Well, I mean,
that sounds like a very Pilate thing to do.
Yeah. Do you know why Pilate was actually taken off of his
because he was such a bad guy.
Yeah. Well, he actually assaulted and killed a whole group of people that were making a holy trip or something like that. And I mean, he had them all killed for nothing.
Yeah.
So
I thought that was interesting up a little further when you were reading, and he asked what crime has he committed? Pilate would literally not have cared about that at all.
No, they wouldn't have given a shit whatsoever. Oh, by the way, the reason why we're starting with Mark is the earliest gospel written, so it's going to be the closest to what actually happened. And you'll see how this very bare bones gospel right here with all of this, it gets even more elaborate, like I was talking about earlier. So we'll see. I mean,
well, not necessarily what actually happened historically. Well,
no, but if you were to consider the gospels to be any kind of truth, you would want to get the earliest one to see what was most likely being.
It's closest to it's the earliest story.
Right.
For what the people closest to the beginning of it all would have said.
Right. All right. So now on to the crucifixion. Let's pin this Jew. So this is Mark 15:21. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, dividing up his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." Now, what are the stations exactly that are taught? Because the station, I know Jesus falls to his knees 3 times. And there's certain other things that happen in between. Like you got the one woman that comes up and gives the cloth to him and lets him pat his face and everything like that. If you'll notice, all of that is missing from this. There is literally nothing about him carrying the cross up to Golgotha except for the fact that Simon takes up his cross.
Okay, so the Stations of the Cross, and this was actually a really big deal when I was growing up because I grew up Catholic.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah, and so we would go through, like, we would go to church on Good Friday. Sorry. We would go to church on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and we would go to church every day because there were different things that we had to do. But the Stations of the Cross is something we would always go through. And my church was really, really big. I don't know how big your church was, but we had thousands of families. And so the Stations of the Cross were along the outside walls, and they would go to each one, and it was like this huge ceremonial shit. So are you ready?
We had the stations, like, I mean, they were permanently installed.
Oh, yeah. Ours too.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one, there's 14. The first one is Jesus is condemned to death.
Okay.
He carries the cross, like they give it to him, and he gets it put on the burden put on his shoulders, right? He falls for the first time.
Right.
Jesus meets his mother, Mary. Simon helps Jesus carry the cross.
Okay.
Then he comes across Veronica, who wipes his face.
Right.
Then Jesus falls for the second time. Then he meets the women of Jerusalem, then falls a third time. The 10th station is when he's stripped of his clothes. The 11th, he's nailed to the cross. The 12th, he dies on the cross. The 13th, he's taken down from the cross. And the 14th, he's placed in the tomb.
So see, the actual walk up to it is a lot less elaborate in this earliest, like, narrative we have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so continuing. They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days? Come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults at him.
You know, that's funny. There's 2 other dudes up there hanging on crosses, looking over at this guy, and the last thing they wanted, they're like, yeah, fuck this guy. That just seems like such a weird thing to do.
Yeah. But also that part changes.
Yeah.
Like in the other Gospels, because, we'll get to it, but yeah, it changes. Now on to the death of Jesus. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?"
Hey, I've got that. Mm-hmm. That was in mine.
Yeah. When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he's calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, and put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom, and when the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Like, I don't know, what did he do? Explode with God dick or something?
Well, no,
like,
it says the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom, just majestically.
I don't know. Well, no, I mean, the curtain was torn, but I mean, they're at Golgotha. Like, there's not like a... This is the temple. There. Yeah, they're not at the temple.
Yeah, I don't know.
It just seems, I don't know, that doesn't make sense. Anyways, some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs.
Hold on, I'm sorry. What version of the Bible is this? What are we reading?
NIV.
Because it says Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph.
I don't know.
Okay.
In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. He had a whole, like, posse of women.
Yeah?
This screams cult leader, does it not?
Well, I mean, yeah, at the time he would have been a cult leader.
Well, yeah.
Like if you try to take like how we view cults right now, like a group of people out in the woods that do crazy shit and think crazy shit and do crazy ceremonies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's what these people were.
Yeah.
At that time.
Exactly. Yeah, and the fact that he had a whole harem of women just makes him sound like David Koresh.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the only difference between a religion and a cult is the fact that religions are societally accepted and cults are not. There's really no difference between them.
True. All right, you ready for the burial?
Yeah.
All right. It was preparation day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, which that part is important because Jesus being the sacrificial lamb, as we heard in Isaiah 53, for Mark, Matthew, and Luke, they have him, being sacrificed and everything like that, on like at the exact time when the Passover lamb was being like slaughtered.
Oh, okay.
So that's why John actually has it doing it differently, because like I think he's being killed I think maybe after Passover or something like that. I can't remember exactly. I just know that John takes place on a different day because they were pushing a different theological concept.
Gotcha.
So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So normally with crucifixion, you're up there for a long time. Like, you're not just up there for a day. You're up there for a long time. But Jesus was like flogged and everything like that beforehand. So they kind of expedited his death, I guess. So Joseph brought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in the linen, and placed it in the tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. He rolled the stone. Who? By the way, Joseph of Arimathea.
Oh, okay.
So it must not have been too hard to move. Just saying.
Right.
Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid.
Okay, so hold on. Let's go back. Because I think this is important, and there's a lot of Marys and Josephs.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think this is interesting because a lot of people say that the whole bit of James being the brother of Christ is like evidence for Jesus being real.
Yeah.
But I wonder, up earlier it says Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mary is the mother of James and is she's the mother of James and Joseph, or she's the mother of James and Joseph is the father of James? I'm not sure how that reads. But either way, why wouldn't it just say Mary, the mother of Jesus, if that's who they were talking about?
Yeah.
Or Mary, the mother of Jesus and James. Like, I don't understand. Like, this James could have had Mary and Joseph as his mom and dad. Mm-hmm. And Jesus had Mary and Joseph as mom and dad, and then be different Marys and Josephs. I mean, this Joseph that rolls the stone over the tomb, over the entrance of the tomb, that's a different Joseph. Yeah. I mean, you and I, our moms have the same name. Yeah. So I guess I just think it's interesting how they word it. Yeah, it's worded a little confusing. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So, for me, though, I took it as there being a James the Younger and then also a Joseph who was a brother of James the Younger.
Okay, so Joseph is a brother of James.
Right. And okay. So I don't I don't know why this Mary is important, because it doesn't seem like this Mary is the mother of Jesus.
Right. It doesn't seem like it. So it seems like if it was, they would just say that.
Right. And then down here, it's just Mary, the mother of Joseph.
So I don't know if that's the same mother, if that's the same Joseph up here. Yeah. Or because down here it says Joseph of Arimathea. So that should be the Joseph that they're talking about there. Yeah. Mary is the mother of Joseph of Arimathea, but that's not the Joseph they're talking about up here.
Yeah. I mean,
sorry, if you're following along in verse 40.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. empty tomb time. So now I'm going to read the long version of this, but just know it actually ends at verse 8 if you guys are following along. So Jesus has risen.
Risen, yeah.
Yeah.
Yay.
When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Okay, so there's 3 women in Mark. Let's make a note of this. Mark, 3 women, Mary, Salome.
Okay.
Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb and they asked each other, "Who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. Well, I mean, that Arimathea fuck.
He did it himself.
He did it by himself. So
right.
I think 3 women might be able to get it. I don't know. Do 3 women equal 1 man back then? I thought it was like 2 women equaling 1 man. In the Bible, like in the Bible, like I believe it says that a woman is worth half of a man at one point when they were laying out the rules. So I'm not trying to be bigoted. I'm just talking about the Bible and what it says.
I got you.
You're like, God damn, can we please get the lawyers in on this?
Let's just move on, please.
Yeah. But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. I would be too. Don't be alarmed. Well, fuck, I'm glad you diffused that situation there, mysterious white-robed man. He said, "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him? But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid.
Okay, so... yes, that's very important.
This is the original ending right here where we're stopping right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So sorry.
I think what's interesting is there was just a guy in a white robe sitting in a tomb, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, Jesus is risen." Even if the women had told somebody. Okay, so if I went to a cemetery... and sat down and walked in, and there was a guy sitting on a tombstone, like, and the ground was all folded up and whatever. And he was like, "No worries, this person has risen. That's why they're not here." You would think they were a crazy person.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't understand why this person's word is the word.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I mean, obviously they were scared shitless. And so the thing that I like here is they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Yeah. Like they didn't say anything. The women didn't tell anybody. So how is there a story if nobody said anything about it? Like, how do we even know this part? It's ridiculous. Anyways, so the earliest manuscripts that we have end right here.
It was probably the crazy man.
Yeah, it probably was. So, but it goes on, and this part was added to corroborate with the other gospels because this part was actually added in the 2nd century.
Yeah, and it says here the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20.
Right.
So this did not exist in the earliest manuscripts. It was added, and they admit it was added later.
Yep. When Jesus rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. Jesus
Christ. One of them had to have been Jezebel.
Which I don't remember that happening in the thing. Like, I remember him saving her, which is a later addition to it. But, like, as far as Mary Magdalene goes, like, I don't remember her driving demons out like he drove demons out of the pigs.
I don't know. 7 of them.
Yeah, 7. She went and told those who had been with him and who were mourning and weeping. When they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they did not believe it. Obviously, because she's a woman. Afterward,
also, it sounds crazy.
Yeah, it does. Afterward, Jesus appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking in the country.
In a different form?
Yeah.
In what form?
I don't know. Probably a pig.
Oops. I promise I haven't been drinking.
Afterward, let's see, these returned and reported it to the rest, but they did not believe them either. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands. And when they drink deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all.
Oh boy.
They will place their hands on sick people and they will get well."
This is where snake oil salesmen and all the fucking
Pentecostals.
crazy evangelical people come.
Yeah.
That's where they get their shit from.
Yeah. After the Lord Jesus had spoken to them, he was taken up into heaven and he sat at the right hand of God. Then the disciples went out and preached everywhere, and the Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it.
So where did this come from then?
Oh, it was a later edition.
No, I know a later edition, but where did it come from?
Well, what do you mean? Like in the Old Testament?
No, like it was a later edition in Mark, but they had to get it from somewhere. So like it was it that artistic license that we've heard about?
Yeah.
And in the later Gospels, and so
Well,
they just kind of combined it and put it in here so that they matched.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's this certain thing called the criterion of embarrassment that a lot of apologists like to use for the empty tomb, saying that the empty tomb had to have been empty because they cited women as finding it, right? Even in Mark.
Uh-huh.
And they say that this is an embarrassment because they wouldn't trust women, right?
Well, there was a man sitting there.
Well, there was. And, but this right here is an actual addition to Mark because they were embarrassed about there not being any actual post-resurrection appearances of Jesus.
Yeah, they just didn't tell anybody and it ended.
Right. The other Gospels all have post-resurrection appearances of Jesus.
Which is interesting because the earliest one does not.
Right. It alludes to it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't directly say it. They were embarrassed by the fact that there was no direct post-resurrection appearances in Mark, so they added it later.
Well, it's not convincing.
Well, no, it's very ad hoc and put on. And plus the style, the written style of it totally goes against everything in Mark. It just doesn't match whatsoever. I don't think that they directly copied it from anywhere. They pretty much just made it all up.
Yeah.
And they added like the things about the sign, like the signs will accompany those who believe, driving out demons and all that kind of stuff. See, those are things that Jesus did in his lifetime and that other prophets have done. So it's like, well, if you truly believe in me, then you will be like Jesus, which is the idea behind all this. And so like that's how they kind of crafted it and whatnot.
Yeah, and it's written in a totally different style. Like it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for Mark. Now, I know that we've been kind of going for a long time. We read all the way through Mark, and what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go to Matthew, and we're going to point out some differences that Matthew has.
There's a lot of stuff about Pilate.
Oh, yes, there is a lot of stuff. Now, the thing to really get across here is that there's a lot more exposition between Pilate and Jesus, where they're talking about who's the Messiah and everything like that. And then it's also a bit more elaborate on the Jesus and Barabbas thing, because do you know what Barabbas's first name actually is?
I do not. Jesus?
Yes.
I think I do remember that.
Yes, his name was Jesus Barabbas. So Jesus, son of the Father, and then also Jesus, son of God, who is the Father.
Right.
So you had two Jesuses up there, one to carry off the sins and the other one. So this is Matthew. This is written after it. So this is one of the corrections that was made. There's a lot more emphasis in Matthew over the fact that Jesus is an innocent, in quotes, innocent man. Mm-hmm. And Pilate has a bit more trouble condemning him to death.
You know who I would love to talk to about this whole Jesus thing?
Who?
That silly professor at University of Northern Alabama. The one that debated Dan Barker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to him about this and see what he comes up with.
Yeah. So did you know that Pilate's wife actually sent him a message about Jesus in Matthew?
I don't.
Yeah, she says, "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." So basically a dream was given to her.
To Pilate's wife.
Yeah, about the innocent man and saying have nothing to do with him.
But which Jesus is she talking about?
Well,
How do we know?
Son of God. Yeah. The Son of God one.
Right.
Because he's the innocent one, whereas Barabbas
the other
is
one
actually,
okay, he actually killed somebody.
Yeah. But again, it has a lot more exposition around the Sanhedrin and the Jewish crowd in general pushing Pilate to condemn him to death. And it actually goes as far to do this, that when I read this was pretty out there. So this is verse 24. This is 27:24. In Matthew. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." Then all the people answered, "His blood is on us and our children."
Of course they did. Well, and here's the funny thing is, like, Pilate wouldn't have cared if his blood was on him.
Right.
It would not have mattered to him at all. So it was kind of like he was trying to fight for keeping Jesus, the innocent, right, alive, and to kill Jesus Barabbas. But, like, he would not have cared. He got to kill somebody. I mean, frankly, he would have probably killed them both.
Right. Well, see, this is further, like in the first one, you kind of got a sense of it. But in this one, it's really kind of blatantly stating that it is the Jewish people that are crucifying Jesus.
Right.
Not the Romans.
Right.
The Romans didn't want to. So while it says, oh, the Romans crucified him, it's very plainly made here that it is the actual Jews that
because
are
the people in the crowd were the council,
right.
The Sanhedrin council people were there, and there were Jews there. The crowd was Jews.
Right. So this all links back to Isaiah 53 because in Isaiah 53, it talks about how people will hate him and everything like that. And so, I mean, it had to be like the Jewish crowd that was crucifying Jesus.
Also, what kind of people say, "My decisions are on me and my children"?
Yeah,
what?
I know.
Like, why you got to bring your kids into this, you crazy bitch?
So then Barabbas flogs Jesus, or has Jesus flogged, and
Barabbas does?
No, Pilate. Sorry.
Okay.
He releases Barabbas,
right?
And then Pilate has Jesus flogged, and handed over to be crucified. Now, on this particular part, the soldiers mock Jesus directly after this. You know, they do the whole crown of thorns and everything, but they put him in a scarlet robe in this one, not a purple robe.
Okay.
This is a red robe, whereas the other one was purple. And they put a staff in his right hand. As like a symbol of him being a king. And so they mock him saying, "Hail, like King of the Jews." Moses, yeah. And then they put him back in his own clothes and they let him away to be crucified, the white stuff and everything. So in this one, they still have Simon the Cyrene come and help him carry the cross. They offer Jesus some wine to drink. They place in Mark they place the thing over Jesus' head, the little
crown of thorns.
Well, no, not the crown of thorns, but the sign. You know, they put a sign saying the King of the Jews.
Yes,
it's with that is the crime that he's supposedly condemned of.
Right.
This one is a little bit more elaborate, saying this is Jesus, the King of the Jews.
Okay, so instead of just the King of the Jews, it says this is Jesus also.
Right.
Gotcha.
And then there are two rebels that are crucified with him. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, just like in Mark. They mocked him about destroying the temple and whatnot. They talk about how he can't save himself. So the death of Jesus, we have from noon to 3 in the afternoon. Darkness came all over the land. So the eclipse
was the same.
Right. He screams out the exact same thing. My God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, so Matthew is this one right here. This is Matthew 27:51. Okay, At the moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, the earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of their tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people.
So we literally had a zombie apocalypse.
Yes. There was
so like in the first one, in Mark, just the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom.
Right.
But this one, there was an earthquake. All the tombs were busted open. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because it said they were raised to life. And then after Jesus' resurrection went into the holy city. So it would have been 3 days later.
Right.
I wonder what they were doing for...
I don't know why...
Not technically 3 days.
Well,
it was Friday.
I don't know why they took it out of kind of like the linear timeline.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's weird.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, most of the Bible is not in a linear timeline.
Yeah, but it does make sense what the centurion says now.
Okay.
If you notice, because the centurion is standing there and he's like, surely he's the son of God because of what happened.
Yeah.
Being that when he died, the tombs were broken open and the zombie resurrection occurred. Mm-hmm. But they didn't go into the town until after Jesus resurrects. Let's see, there's still a lot of women there. Oh, except now there's Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph. So now it's pretty blatant that they're kind of brothers. And then the mother of Zebedee's sons. So
is Salome not the mother of Zebedee's sons?
Let's see, actually.
Salome. Yeah.
They just do they talk about her very indirectly.
Well, she's a woman.
Yeah, well, it's just in the first one they talk about her, directly, but this is just mother of the Zebedee sons. Anyways, Arimathea, he gives them his tomb.
Well, it also says here that Arimathea was a disciple. Did it say that in the last one?
Who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. This is interesting. So Joseph replaced Judas, I guess. Joseph of Arimathea. That's weird because the other one doesn't even mention that.
No, it just says, it says he was there, but it doesn't say. I guess that's how he became a disciple, because he was there and witnessed.
Yeah. Now, it does say that Joseph of Arimathea rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. So still Joseph able to roll the stone away. Guarding the tomb. So this is where the guards come in. Pilate tells guards to, because they were talking about how Jesus supposedly was supposed to rise after 3 days. So Pilate has them guard the tomb. Mm-hmm. This doesn't happen until Matthew. So now Jesus is going to rise from the dead. Let's see how he rises from the dead in this one. Oh man, Matthew. So here's 28:2. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. So, honey.
And then the angel talks to the women.
Well, yeah, but honey, how did the women come to find the tomb in this one? In the previous one, in Mark?
Oh, they just walked up. There was nobody outside the tomb. They just walked up. The stone was rolled away, and there was a dude sitting inside.
Yeah, a lot of people make it out to be like, oh, these are just different perspectives of the events. How is this a different perspective?
This is not. You can't. I'm sorry. It's so vastly different. This is not a different perspective. A violent earthquake like lightning and this. There was a man in white sitting inside the tomb before, but even if that was an angel and not an actual person, it doesn't say that. This time he appears in grand fashion, scares the shit out of people, and it's just. This is not a different perspective. This is an entirely different, this is completely exaggerated. This is this is a story that is like Telephone gets grander.
Right. And the actual like Greek text, like the Greek words that are used, map directly to the Daniel and the Lion's Den. How they describe the angels appearing and everything like that is the exact words that are used in the Daniel and Lion's Den story. So then this is what the angel tells the women. Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay, then go quickly and tell his disciples. He has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you. Like that last part seems a little tacked on there. Now I have told you. Oh shit. Okay.
even though the guy says something similar in Mark, it was just a man.
Yeah, it was. And now it's a grand angel that knocks away the stone and then proclaims Jesus to be risen and everything like that. But so it goes on to say, so the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. But suddenly Jesus meets them, appears like Batman out of nowhere, saying greetings, he said.
Greetings. That seems like a weird first thing to say. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's better than what's up.
Yeah. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me.
So Jesus appears to them.
And tells them the exact same thing that the angel just told them. Like, I don't understand that. And then, of course, it goes on, like it elaborates on the Great Commission, which is the Great Commission is what we kind of heard at the end of Mark that's tacked on in the second century. Yeah. But this next part, that was kind of important because this is the origin maybe of the whole stolen body thing, because Pilate, there's this exposition where Pilate tells the guards to say, oh, the disciples came and stole the body. I'm sorry, but in the first century, if like somebody actually stole the body, then Pilate would have like arrested all the disciples. Like even if Pilate made up a lie that the body was stolen, he would have rounded up all the disciples and everybody associated with Jesus
and killed them. Yeah, absolutely.
And kill them. So, but anyways, that's it for Matthew. There's more, of course, because Matthew goes into a lot more exposition about Jesus and after he resurrects. But that's where we're going to stop for today. Now on to Luke. The accusation by the Sanhedrin is that we have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be Messiah, a king. Which, if you guys don't know, he doesn't oppose paying taxes to Caesar. Jesus famously says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." So that is in no way what is actually said. But the big difference here in Luke, in the Pilate part, is that Pilate actually has Jesus sent to Herod upon hearing that Jesus is a Galilean. So Pilate goes through the whole rigmarole of sending him to Herod. Herod didn't find any wrongdoing in Jesus and then sends him back. This is important because you don't remember in Matthew, Herod, like the daddy Herod, killed a whole bunch of Jewish babies because he thought that the Jewish king was being born right then. Yeah. Right? And then after Herod was ruling over that land, Herod Archelaus actually comes into power right after that. And so the reason why when Joseph and Mary were coming back and they went to Bethlehem or whatnot, coming back from Egypt, they were afraid that Herod Archelaus was going to seek them out and kill them. So that's why they went to like Bethlehem.
So if Jesus had been sent to Herod, he probably would not have sent him back, even if he hadn't committed any crime. Right. He would have killed him.
Yeah, or at least acknowledged like Jesus or this king of the Jews. Yeah. You know? So, but that's a big difference. So Pilate gets him back and there's still even more exposition, like even heavier laden with, oh, he's done nothing wrong. And Pilate doesn't know like what to do with him and finally gives in to the Jewish Sanhedrin, which
after the third time.
After the third time, 3 being magical number. Okay, so here's where the daughters of Jerusalem come into effect, because after Pilate condemns him to be crucified, it says right here, a large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children, for the time will come when you will say, blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. And then there's a little bit of a callback to some scripture. They will say the mountains fall on us and to the hills and cover us. Okay, so then they set up the scene on Golgotha where there's two criminals now. See, it was rebels in Matthew.
Right.
And I believe they were criminals in Mark too.
Yeah.
But they were asshole criminals. And this one, they are criminals. And it's in Luke that we see Jesus saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. That's the famous line there.
Okay. And he doesn't say that. Like, they don't record that in either of the other two.
No. Jesus doesn't say anything on the cross other than Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani.
It's amazing how much more elaborate this gets and how much longer.
Yeah, it does.
So the sign is different again.
The sign is different again. This says, this is the King of the Jews. So now the big difference here of him being crucified with the two criminals, right? Mm-hmm. One of them hurls insults. Shit talks Jesus, basically.
Right.
The other one, though, the other criminal, rebukes the asshole criminal, saying, don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. And so Jesus affirmed to him that he will inherit the kingdom of God just like him.
Well, that's new. That's completely new to this one, because in the other one, they both.
Well, it's all about the redeeming, the redeeming nature of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus was hung up on the cross as a criminal, right? Mm-hmm. And he was hung with two other criminals. One of them was truly an asshole, and I guess deserves hell. Maybe, I don't know. Probably not. But the other guy seems to have repented of his sins or whatnot, right, and believes on God. And so it doesn't matter like what you do in this life. You believe on God or believe on Jesus, right? And you will get into paradise. So, I mean, that is the main teaching point here.
Right.
Yeah. There was a darkness here too.
Was there an earthquake too?
It does not. There's not an earthquake recorded here. The curtain.
Oh, he says more shit.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. This is completely changed here. This one is a completely different last words of Jesus. He doesn't actually say Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani in this one. It's Jesus calls out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. When he said this, he breathed his last. So in this one, these are his last words here, but everything up until this point says Eloi, Eloi. So that's an interesting change that they made there.
Yeah.
So basically this one does more explaining than Mark, because Mark, it's a little confusing as far as the centurion goes. Because like it just kind of comes out of nowhere, like, oh, this must be the Son of God. But like the way that Jesus dies here, like saying, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit and everything like that. He praised God, saying, surely this is a righteous man, and basically saying, that this has to be the Son of God.
There's no earthquake. There's no zombie horde.
No zombie horde, nothing like that.
Interesting.
Oh, I'm wondering. So in this one, it repeats the same thing that Mark says about Joseph of Arimathea. Because as you know, Jesus dies, everything like that. Joseph comes in, asked to be taken down. Well, in this one, it talks about Joseph being a member of the council, a good, upright man, and then saying that he's waiting for the kingdom of God. I'm wondering if the waiting for the kingdom of God is a way to say that he was like a disciple. Maybe not a disciple, but just a Christian.
Perhaps.
In Matthew, though, it specifically says a disciple. So it's interesting. Everything else happens just like in the other ones. They wrap them in linens, they bury them, women are there. All right. Jesus has risen.
I can't wait.
So, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took spices. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly, two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words.
So now two guys, glimmered in.
Two fucks glimmered in to let him know about this shit. And it harkens back in the story to when Jesus talks about how he will be handed over to sinners, crucified, and on the third day raised again.
Yeah.
Then they pretty much just leave and go tell the disciples. It was I can't remember what Matthew said. We'll go back and look at Matthew here in a second.
Oh, and this one in Peter. Oh, this one was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James.
Right. So in Luke, it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles.
And we don't know who the others were.
So others. So it's 3 plus more women that we don't know.
And not the same 3.
And not this different group of 3 women. Peter apparently verifies that the women aren't bullshitting him. And then, of course, there's the road to Emmaus, which is a post-resurrection appearance of Jesus. And that's what happens directly after this. So let's actually go back to Matthew real quick. So in Matthew, there's only 2 women, Mary and then other Mary. I'm guessing that's Mary, the mother. I guess it would be the mother of James and Joseph.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Mary and the other Mary. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary.
Right. All right, so now we're on to John, and this will be the last one that we have to do. Sorry, this is such a long one this week. There's 4 different stories. So we're actually having to start in 18 to verse 28.
This is John.
Yeah, this is John. Sorry, this is Gospel of John. There's just more. There's more exposition on Pilate having a problem with killing Jesus.
And Jesus talks about how his kingdom is not of this world. He talked a lot. In the earlier one, he didn't say anything. Right.
Well, John is, of course, a completely different theological perspective.
I wonder why this was included in canon.
Well, my only guess, my guess is that it was a big enough group that they had to include them, or else it would have fractured the movement. Oh. That's the only thing that I can think of.
And it was close-ish.
Yeah.
It's also is it the most magical, right?
Mm-hmm. The Jews here also say that, or Pilate says to the Jews, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." They falsely say that, but we have no right to execute anyone. I disagree. They execute people all the fucking time, especially using crucifixion in there.
Right.
Also, in all 4 Gospels, it's except for maybe Mark, it's painstakingly made known that, Mark says it too, that they are calling him the King of the Jews, that he is not calling himself, which isn't exactly true for John, because Jesus says, "I am the Son of God, I am the Messiah, I am God," kind of thing.
Well, and he answered the Sanhedrin, remember?
Mm-hmm.
When the Sanhedrin council met, the only question he answered was, "Are you the King of the Jews? Are you the Messiah?" And he said yes.
Mm-hmm. They go through the whole Jesus Barabbas versus Jesus exposition. They call for, of course, Jesus to be crucified. Position of Pilate and Jesus. You know how before, of course, you've already mentioned that Jesus talks a lot in this one.
Right.
In this one, it actually, Jesus answers saying, "You have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." This both emphasizes the fact that this is God's plan.
Yeah.
God wants this to happen. It's all part of God's plan. He wouldn't be able to do it unless God wanted him to. And he's condemning the Jews. He's condemning the Jews. Well, the current Jewish nation, I guess. And it just makes it even more clear about it. Also, they flog him. Like, another big difference here is that and when the Jews initially give him over, they go ahead and flog Jesus, and then he talks to him.
Yeah, he also says, "I have no." The Jews, the chief priests say, "We have no king but Caesar."
Right.
So, like, they talk about Caesar here, which they.
Well, yeah, I think that this is to just further solidify that the Jews serve a different master now, kind of like in the rest of the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. Like, they will serve other people and not their God. Mm-hmm. And in this one, they're basically turning on their God. And I think that it's just way more emphasis on those portions. They change it to put more emphasis on those certain things.
Right.
So this one, this is the crucifixion of Jesus. So obviously they have him carrying his own cross. They're going to Golgotha and everything like that. Well, the sign on Jesus' cross actually reads, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." And so you'll see crucifixes with you'll have them with multiple different like versions of the title.
Right.
I'm sure that you can find one with each one of these. Casey's bringing up a good point about how there's no clear indication of the stations. Like, there's no linear storyline that has it like the stations of the Bible. I believe
Stations of the Cross.
Or Stations of the Cross. So another thing, in every single one of these, the guards gamble for Jesus's clothes. And this is important because this is part of the scripture for this suffering servant. Talking about how they will gamble for his clothes or whatever.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
You want me to go through?
Sure.
So station 1 is Mark 15.
Okay.
1 through 15, Jesus is condemned to death.
Right. That happens in all of them.
Station 2 is in John 19, 13 through 17. Station 3, Jesus falls for the first time, Isaiah 53, 4 through 7, and John 1, 29. Station 4, Luke 2, 25 through 40, Lamentations 1, 12, and John 19, 26 and 27.
Which station is that?
4, Jesus meets his mother.
Yep. See, it's right here. Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved stand nearby.
Station 5, that's Simon helps Jesus carry the cross. That's in Mark 15:21, Mark 8:34, and 2 Timothy, or 2 Timothy 2:3.
Right.
6 is in Isaiah 53, 2 to 3.
Wait, what's 6?
Veronica wipes his face. And Matthew 25:40.
Matthew 25:40? That's not even part of, like, 27 is the actual
25. Go to Matthew 25.
Or the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of the brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me."
That's what maybe that's a different version of the Bible?
Let's see.
Let's see, they're using, it doesn't say what version of the Bible they're using.
Here, we'll use English Standard Version, which some people say is better, 25:40. "And the king will answer to them, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me.'"
That's what this is saying, because Veronica...
Part, like, the wiping of the face does not actually appear in any of the Passion narratives.
Yeah, so that's where that comes from, okay. Supposedly. Station 7, Jesus falls the second time, is in Psalm 38, 6 through 22, and Isaiah 63, verse 9.
Those are not the Passion narratives.
That's where they're getting... Well, none of that is in here. That's my point, is that the Stations of the Cross don't actually really come from the Gospels.
Right.
They don't come from that. They're pieced together from all over. Jesus,
it seems especially the Old Testament. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Station 8, Jesus consoles the women of Jerusalem, comes from Luke 23, 27 through 31, and Matthew 7, 21.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Luke 23, 27 through 21.
Okay. Luke 23, 27. Yeah, that I remember that being in here.
Mm-hmm. And then Matthew 7, 21.
Right.
And you're going to love this. Station 9 is Jesus falls the third time.
Right.
Psalm 37, 23 and 24.
Mm-hmm.
And Hebrews 4, 15 through 16.
This is not part of the Passion narratives. Like, what the fuck?
Station 10, Jesus is stripped of his garments, John 19,
Yeah.
23, 24, and Hebrews, Psalm 22, 16 through 18.
Right, and that's where they quote scripture. This happened, in John 19, 24?
23 and 24.
Well, in 24, they quote scripture saying, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment.
Yeah. So that's station 10.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Station 11, Jesus is nailed to the cross, Luke 23, 33 through 43, and John 19, 1.
Okay.
Jesus dies, John 19, 28 through 37, and Matthew 27 through 50.
Okay.
I mean, Jesus dies in all of them, but these are where they get the stations from. Then 13, Jesus is taken down from the cross, John 19, 38 through 40, and Psalm 22, 14 through 15.
I like how they basically use almost none of Mark.
Well, station 14, laid in the tomb, Mark 15, 46 through 47.
Yeah.
And then Matthew 27, 57 through 61. And that Mark 15,
Mm-hmm. That's not part of
that's
the
not part of the
Passion
original Mark. Is it?
What? Mark 15? No, it's Mark 16 where the
where they
additional-
added that was in Mark 16. Okay. So yeah, Mark 15, 46 and 47.
Okay.
And then Matthew 27, 57 through 61. So
Okay, so you know how in the previous, that's all of that. The crucifixion of Jesus. At this point, Jesus on the cross says to the disciple, "Woman, here's your son," and to the disciple, "Here's your mother." So basically, like he's established, he's like reinforcing here that you're part of the heavenly family. And that you're all family now, brother, sister, father, mother, all that kind of stuff.
just to note, there are also some other sources like where it goes through the stations, but it every time, and like this list I have, it has different portions from the Gospels, but it doesn't have any extra gospel sources.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are going to be different, opinions about it, but I think it's interesting that they do point to these other things.
Right. Well, it's because they consider the Old Testament to be prophetic of the New and what Jesus did. So, in this one, Jesus actually says that I am thirsty, and they gave him wine vinegar. So, like in the other ones, Jesus never asked for wine or anything like that, or even, I'm not sure if Jesus even partook of it. It was after taking this drink that Jesus says, it is finished, and he gave up his spirit. So, I mean, he doesn't actually say anything all that grand at his death there. And in this one, you have the famous piercing of the side in John. They normally, like at the end of the day, they would come and break your legs if you're on the cross and you're still alive.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, but they do it so that you'll die quicker, because you'll die of asphyxiation. And with broken knees, broken legs, you can't like lift yourself up. So they instead of breaking his legs, they pierced the side to make sure that he was done. And of course, that's when the blood and water, burst out of him or whatever. They hearken back to the Old Testament saying none of his bones will be broken, and about him being pierced.
Yeah, this is the first one where they've talked about piercing his side.
Mm-hmm. It's the only one that says that his side was pierced. Right. Of course, Joseph Arimathea, putting him in the tomb. See, this has Jesus... this says, because it was the Jewish day of preparation. So, before it was when they were actually sacrificing the lamb. This is like the Jewish day of prep, like when they would just get the lamb. It's like,
well, in the other gospels they talked about it being the Jewish day of preparation. That's why it's on Friday.
yeah.
That's why temporally they know it's on Friday, because Saturday is the Sabbath. So it was the day of preparation for the Sabbath.
Well, right. I know that John takes place on a different day, though, because he has different theological reasons for doing it.
The other ones say on the day of preparation.
Yeah. All right, the empty tomb. In this one, it is only Mary Magdalene that goes, and the stone's already been removed.
Okay.
And but she immediately runs to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one that Jesus loved, apparently.
So there was
They
no
fucked?
angel, there was no man, or two angels, or anybody?
Let's see. Well, Peter and the other disciple went to the tomb. It doesn't appear that they didn't find anything in the tomb. Jesus was just gone.
I mean,
Like
they
his
found
body.
the clothes.
Well, yeah, they found the linens and everything like that, but I mean, his body was disappeared.
But in this one, it was only Mary Magdalene. She went and got the men, and the men came back. But there was
Right.
no man. There were no angels. There was
No guards.
no guards, no lightning. There was only guards in one
Yeah.
in Matthew.
Right.
There was no lightning or earthquake or crazy shit
No.
that happened here, which is surprising because this is the crazy shit gospel.
Right. And then after this, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene. So I guess Mary was the first one that Jesus appears to. So interesting. Man, today was a long one. I'm so sorry that I did so much.
It's a lot.
It is.
I think the Christmas one was longer too.
Yeah. I hope that you guys stuck it out to the end. Next week, we're going to talk about how a kid dies.
Yeah, they kill a baby because reasons. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome. That's what we're going to start out with.
I hope that you guys have a nice Easter weekend, because honestly, Easter's pretty pagan in general. I mean, we hide eggs. In any of these stories, you didn't hear them about hiding eggs or anything like that.
Yeah, we are going to color Easter eggs this weekend. We're going to do that because that's always fun to do. And Xander loves doing that and drawing on the...
Yeah, we're going to write heathen on there, and we're going to prepare like a whole meal for Satan.
No, we're not going to do that.
We're not going to do a pentagram?
No.
No blood sacrifices? It's what the Christians do.
No.
I mean, Jews.
I was going to say, what? No, we're not going to do that. We're going to color Easter eggs and, Xander will have a little Easter basket and just hang out. We could make lamb.
Oh, we could. Isn't that expensive?
I mean, kind of.
Can we make it kosher?
Why?
Anyways, heathens, I'm glad that you guys stuck it out with us. I hope that you appreciated going through all of the different gospels, figuring out that the stations are bullshit, and I guess we'll see you heathens next week.
Don't forget to stand up and use your voice.
Bye, heathens.
Bye, y'all.